you've got to have a world-class medical research facility. And in the James Cancer Hospital at the OSU Wexner Medical Center, we have just that here in Columbus, and we should all be proud of it. No one in this room has not been touched by that bitch of a disease called cancer. And what we do in coming together every August to ride on behalf of cancer research for Pelotonia is as good an event as can possibly happen. And many of you have been donors, many of you are riders. Dwight's a legend. So my hope is, and the hope of several Rotarians, is that next year we don't come together with green jerseys, we come together with blue jerseys and the Columbus Rotary logo on the front of them. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce to you the executive director and the man who brings the energy like nobody else when it comes to the mission and the passion of the James Cancer Hospital, Doug Ullman.
Thank you for your amazing leadership. You are among a very small group of individuals who've participated in every single Pelotonia ride, and your leadership is quite frankly inspiring and overwhelming. So thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. I have to tell you, I'm super embarrassed to have driven here. I mean, I've never felt so small as I do right now. So to all those in the room who have ridden in the past, who are sporting your jerseys, I didn't get the memo about wearing my jersey. I didn't get the memo about riding my bike here. So I apologize profusely. Thank you. Yeah, this is normal. And Rich mentioned Dwight is a legend. Dwight is a legend in many ways, and I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but rest assured that he was involved before there was a Pelotonia in the concepting. He was also involved in saying that's a terrible idea before it ever became a reality. I'll never forget meeting you, and I'll never forget that story, so thank you very much. It's an honor to be here for a number of reasons, and I want to do three things today in the time we have together. One is just express my gratitude because I know so many people in this room have given your time and your talent and your treasure to what I consider to be our shared cause, and that is the eradication of a disease that unfortunately touches all of our lives. The second thing I want to do is just share some very personal stories with you that I hope will show you why this is so personal to so many of us. And the third is just to highlight the impact that this community is having. Because it's one thing to talk about raising money and dollars, but it's yet another thing to talk about saving and changing lives. And I know this group cares so much about doing that, considering the work you've done, whether it's with cleft palate work around the world or whether it's the wells and things that you just saw on the screen. So thank you for the work you're doing here in Central Ohio and well beyond. So let me start by just telling you a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. I grew up in Maryland, and I'll tell you an interesting story because I'll never forget this. Growing up in my room, I had a baseball that was signed by Brooks Robinson. Okay, so I was a big Orioles fan. My parents were Orioles fans. My grandparents were Orioles fans. And I tell you that because my grandfather was a Rotarian. And I'll never forget going with him to meet Brooks Robinson and get this baseball signed. And everybody that came into my room, all my friends would say, "Where did you get this Brooks Robinson baseball? How'd you meet Brooks Robinson?" And it was at a Rotary event in Baltimore many years ago. So Rotary is always something that I've been fond of and energized by and on the periphery of as a young kid. But I grew up in this amazing place with an amazing family, with the great parents, older brother who 99% of the time was great, and thought I had everything. I basically had this perfect upbringing. And I was fortunate enough to play soccer and fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go to Brown University and play on the soccer team there. And everything was perfect until it wasn't. And one night in August of 1996, I went on a run with my older brother. My brother was working in politics at the time, and he had gotten totally out of shape. And as the annoying younger brother, I sort of said to him, "Hey, tough guy, let's see if you can still run." And he took the challenge. We went for a 3 or 4 mile run through my parents' neighborhood where we were staying that summer. And when we got back, I was sitting on the couch and I couldn't stop wheezing. And after an hour or two, my parents said, "We should go to the emergency room." And I said, "No, I'm fine." I was 19, I was invincible. I'd never been to the hospital before, never had a broken bone, never had any major health issues. And An hour or two later, it was almost midnight, my parents said, let's go to the emergency room. I got to the hospital. The doctor there was great. He said, you're totally fine. Must be an allergic reaction or there's some pollen in the air. You'll be fine when you wake up tomorrow. And as I was leaving the hospital, he said, before you go, let's just do a chest x-ray. Did the chest x-ray, got home. He said, it looks fine. I went home that night. I woke up the next morning. I felt totally fine. I was coaching soccer at a youth camp. Went to camp. You'll remember this. Remember, it's 1996. Came home. We had an answering machine. I pushed the button. There was a message from our family physician. And Dr. Millis said, I was in the hospital today visiting another patient. He said, and they told me you were in last night, so I went to radiology and I looked at your x-ray. And he said, you need to have a CAT scan immediately. What he saw was a shadow behind my heart. He actually thought I had a massive heart condition. And it wasn't until that afternoon when I was sliding out of the CAT scan apparatus when I realized something was wrong, because out of the corner of my eye, I saw the technician pointing to the screen. And I thought to myself, if everything was normal, he probably wouldn't be pointing to the screen. That day changed my life forever. I was diagnosed with a very rare type of sarcoma, cartilage tumor that was growing next to my spine and next to my lung behind my heart. Had I not gone running with my brother, had I not gone to the hospital, had the doctor not said, let's do an x-ray, had my doctor not been there the next day, there was a series of things that had to happen. And I'm fortunate that they did, because otherwise a year or two later, this tumor would have probably been in my lungs and who knows where else. I remember being diagnosed like it was yesterday, and I know there are others in this room who've had that experience. I'll never forget where I was. I'll never forget this sterile brick office building in downtown Baltimore. I'll never forget watching my parents sobbing. I'll never forget the feeling of being out of control and helpless. What would this mean? Would I ever get to go back to school? Would I ever play soccer again? All these thoughts that run through your head and this sort of roller coaster of emotion. And that's just the start of the journey, because 6 months later I was diagnosed with melanoma, and 3 months after that I was diagnosed with invasive melanoma, all between my 19th and 20th birthdays. And so when I stand here and say it's personal, we all have a story. And I don't tell you mine because it's more significant than anyone else's in the room. But I tell you that because the work we do is so very personal to all of us. After I was diagnosed, I was thinking about life, and I was remembering back to my soccer days. And I'll tell you a quick story, but I had this unbelievable soccer coach that I was fortunate enough to play for in high school. And he was one of these people who, if you played for him, you loved him. If you played against him, you hated him. He clearly is retired now because his shenanigans would not fly in this day and age. And yet as kids, we grew up sort of saying, I want to play for this guy. So he had all kinds of sort of idiosyncrasies, but one of them was that in order to try out for the soccer team, you had to juggle the soccer ball 150 times. And so if you drove through our neighborhood in the summer, this is what you would see. Every kid was out on the front lawn practicing juggling the soccer ball. And when you got to tryouts on the first day, he'd say, okay, everybody show me what you can do. And so you'd partner up, and one person would juggle the ball 150 times, the other person would count, and then you'd switch. And at the end of that, he'd say, congratulations. Now you can actually try out for the team. And half the kids would say, what do you mean try out? I just did it. He said, no, that doesn't mean you're any good. He said, that just means you have discipline. That just means you were willing to sacrifice and spend the time to train yourself and train your body. And anyone in this room could juggle the ball 150 times if you spent the time. But the other thing he talked a lot about was, and some of you know the game of soccer, where the ball is constantly moving and there's never a stoppage in play. And he talked about this idea of walk when you can, run when you must. And the idea in the sport is that if you don't take the time to walk when the ball's on the other side of the field or when it's out of bounds or whatever it might be, you'll never have the energy, you'll never have the stamina, you'll never have the ability to sprint when you need to. And cancer for me was one of those times when it just stopped me in my tracks. And I was forced to walk. And I hated it. But I knew it was a necessary part of recovery and a necessary part of transitioning to a new focus in my life. So soccer never became as important as it was pre-cancer to me and to our family. But this cancer journey allowed me to focus my time and energy on supporting others with this disease and hopefully eradicating cancer altogether. And so soon after my diagnosis, I was reading something that a physician had wrote, and he was an oncologist, and he talked about the obligation of the cured. And what he meant was, if you have been fortunate enough to have this disease and survive, we have an obligation to pave the way for others who unfortunately will be diagnosed in the future. And I really took that to heart, and I called my parents, who I owe everything in the world to. And I said, look, I have no idea what we should do or how we should do it. I was 20 years old at the time. I said, but we should start something, or we should get involved somehow, because we were fortunate to have this opportunity to give back and serve others. And so my 20-plus year career has been spent in the nonprofit space, working with various cancer organizations, focusing on how do we eradicate the suffering and pain that this disease causes so many of us. And I will tell you that the most beautiful thing I've witnessed, and the most beautiful thing that I've been able to experience, is what happens when you bring thousands and thousands of people together around a shared vision and a shared cause. And on the one hand, we are so fortunate that people have experienced this disease in a way that has inspired them to get involved. On the other hand, we are so unfortunate that this disease continues to be so very pervasive. So coming here to Pelotonia 3 years ago was probably the biggest honor of my career, because what this community in Central Ohio and across the state, really, and now beyond, has come together to attempt to do is nothing short of phenomenal. And I want to tell you just a couple stories, because I think it's important. You know, people ask all the time, why do you think Pelotonia works? And to me, it's really simple. It's because you have this unbelievable level of engagement here, not just for our cause, but across the community, whether it's with the Children's Hospital, or whether it's with Habitat, who we heard from earlier, whether it's any number of issues and causes that affect all of our lives. People here come together to support things that they know will positively impact all of us in the long run. You've got great corporate support, you've got great academic support, and then you have great community support, and that combination is really powerful. So when we bring people together, what can be the result of that? The first year of Pelotonia, there were 2,200 riders who raised $4.5 million. And I can tell you that for a first year event, that is overwhelmingly successful. Last year, we had nearly 8,000 riders who raised over $24 million. And this year, our goal is to have more than 8,000 riders raise $25.5 million. And it's only possible because of that confluence of corporate support, community support, academic and university support. And so, while it's fun to say we've raised X amount of dollars and we've had this many riders and all these statistics that we can throw out, to me, none of it actually matters unless we're translating those results into significant impact. If people's lives aren't improved, it doesn't matter what happens in August every year here in Columbus. And the beautiful thing over the last 8 years has been that our 100% commitment of investing every single dollar directly into cancer research has resulted in dramatic impact. And I'm going to share just one quick story with you. So we invest in young researchers. We invest in people who have audacious and outlandish ideas, people who can't get funding from other sources, people who say, you know what, I've got an idea and I need $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever the amount might be to pursue my idea. Sort of a venture capital approach. And we know that not all of them are going to work. We know that sometimes we're going to hit home runs and sometimes we're going to strike out, but it's worth taking that risk, seeking transformational change. So about 5 or 6 years ago, one of the top researchers at the James had an idea. There was a drug that was developed for MS. And this researcher focuses on leukemia. And he said, you know what? I think there might be an application for this drug with a certain type of leukemia called chronic lymphocytic leukemia, a disease that at the time was 80% fatal, 20% 5-year survival rate. And he called the drug company that made the drug and he said, can we have this drug to run a clinical trial? And the drug company said, absolutely, we'll give you the drug, but we're not going to pay for the clinical trial. And he looked around for money for this clinical trial and he couldn't find it because people thought this is not a great idea. This is not going to work. So Pelotonia invested $200,000. They gave Dr. Bird $200,000 and they said, go do the trial. And the results were staggering. And I don't stand here to tell you that every grant we've ever made has had these results, because it hasn't happened. But what happened that time was phenomenal. 84% of the patients who took that drug went into full remission. One of the patients who started in that trial was on hospice care and is alive today. This pill, it's an oral chemotherapeutic pill that you take 3 times a day with virtually no side effects. It's called a targeted therapy. It was approved by the FDA faster than any drug in the history of the FDA oncology program. It is now being used by tens of thousands of people around the world who have CLL and is now being tested for 2 additional types of cancer that it might have an applicability for. So the reason I tell you that is because when people ask me, what's the best thing about Pelotonia? What's your most vivid memory of Pelotonia? It's really simple. It was last year. It was last year in August downtown at the opening ceremony, where we had a guest speaker stand up in front of 15,000 people on Columbus Commons and share her story. And she told the story of coming to Columbus to ride in Pelotonia from Washington, D.C. with her husband. Her husband's an OSU alum, and he had been trying to convince her to come ride for several years, and it just didn't work out. And it wasn't until after they signed up to ride, that Susan realized that the drug she was taking was this drug ibrutinib that I just told you about. After battling cancer for 16 years, when she was out of options, her physician sat her down and said, there's one other thing I want to try. It's a pill that you take 3 times a day, and I think this will have success. And she looked out at 15,000 people and she said, I am going to ride with you tomorrow. Only because thousands of you 5, 6, 7 years ago decided to volunteer or decided to ride or decided to get involved in this movement in some way. And she said, how could I ever possibly thank you for literally saving my life? And I think one of the most beautiful things of Pelotonia is that there are people who woke up today, who will wake up tomorrow, who will wake up next week, next month, and next year because of this community. And one of the beautiful things about service is that sometimes we actually don't get to meet those that we serve. And I think that's the most beautiful thing, that there are people all around the country and around the world who've been impacted by this community effort. And we will probably never know their names and we'll never get to meet them throughout the course of our life. So for those of you who have ridden in the past, you'll know that the most impactful point in the route is seeing signs just like this. And they're all over the route. And these are people that we actually don't know, who come out of their homes, who come out of their neighborhoods, who line the streets, who express their gratitude. And it's a powerful, powerful thing. And so, in my estimation, we're all here on this earth for one reason, and that's to improve it for others. And the work that you all do in this community is overwhelmingly positive. The work that we're trying to do is hopefully inspiring. And on behalf of the people that we serve, many of whom who live all across the country and around the world, I want to thank you in advance. For those of you who have ridden in the past, who've been virtual riders, volunteers, donors, please know that the difference you're making is real and significant, and it means the world to us personally as well as professionally. So thank you so very much.
Off what you've raised from year 1 to last year, what could you say that what kind of other investment was attracted to that on top of the pot that's been raised?
Great question. So I think the question was what kind of other investment was sort of on top of the money that's been raised? Yeah, so great question. One of the things that candidly we have not, in my opinion, done a great job of historically is tracking the long-term impact of these investments. So I'll give you a couple examples. Dr. Bird, who I mentioned, who was the one who discovered ibrutinib or developed ibrutinib, he has probably received $20 to $30 million in federal funding in the last 5 years since that $200,000. And so when we think about it in terms of this sort of venture capital approach, we look at that and say, wait a minute, a $200,000 investment landed tens of millions of dollars that we don't have to fund now. So I think that idea of sort of jump-starting the best and brightest minds is part of our mission. So we're trying to figure out how to quantify that in its entirety. One of the things we do is we fund a lot of young researchers who may be undergraduate or graduate students, and we know that they sometimes then leave the university and go off to other places, and we want to be able to track their career as well. In fact, in a meeting last week, I said I wouldn't be surprised if someday there's a Nobel Prize winner who says, hey, I was thinking about doing something else for a career, but I got this $30,000 or $50,000 award when I was a student at Ohio State, and it landed me on this research track. So it's a great question, and something that I think we want to do a better job of quantifying and then communicating out to the community.
Our version of Pelotonia compare with other communities?
How does this compare with other communities? Yeah, so great question. So Pelotonia was modeled after an event in Boston called the Pan-Mass Challenge. The Pan-Mass Challenge supports cancer research at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. And Pan-Mass has been around for, I believe, 41 years. And they raised last year nearly $45 million. Which is remarkable. I'll tell you two quick stories. When the community leadership here was thinking about starting Pelotonia, they called and actually hired the person who started the Pan-Mass Challenge and said, hey, would you come in and tell us how to do this? And that individual came to Columbus and basically in a little bit of I'll say it, a little bit of a condescending manner, said to the community leadership here, you should really temper your expectations because this isn't Boston. And, I don't know. And so I think that was a big motivator for the folks here. Our hope is that we will, it's not a competition. Every dollar that goes to cancer research is important. So that's sort of the top in terms of fundraising every year. Many communities across the country have started events like this. We actually get calls probably every week from people who say, how can we do this? And we're happy to share the model and tell them. But I will tell you that most have not seen great success. And I think sometimes people can underestimate, what it takes to do it at scale. A lot of times what happens is communities will call and they'll say, hey, we've got a very generous benefactor who's willing to underwrite the event. And that's a huge, huge advantage. But what they don't typically have is the level of engagement that I've seen here. And I mean, I just personally tell you, my family and I, we moved here from Austin, Texas, and we never dreamed of leaving Austin. And people say to me all the time, why did you leave Austin? And it's because I've never seen a more generous place. And if you think about having the largest children's hospital, the largest Ronald McDonald House, the largest Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure, the largest cancer bike ride, I mean, things here are happening because people care and they're involved and they're engaged. And I'm not so sure that level of engagement exists everywhere else.
Are you collaborating with anybody at Ohio Health or any other medical institutions in Columbus besides the James?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually fund research currently at the James, at Nationwide Children's, and actually also at Cincinnati Children's because they are all part of the same umbrella cancer program that's designated by the National Cancer Institute. Some of you may have heard this story, but every 5 years, cancer centers that are designated by the National Cancer Institute have to reapply to be certified and to be funded. And so every 5 years they put in an application. It was 1,200 pages. This was 18 months ago. It was 1,200 pages. And then you get a score, and the score is based on 30 of your peers from across the country coming to your cancer center and looking at your research program to see sort of how it's going. And the score is like golf. So, the higher score, the worse off you are. 25 years ago, the James got a score of about 40. And then the best score you can get is 10. And about, I guess it would have been 12 years ago, they got a 12. And so they were moving up, and that's sort of in the exceptional range. And the last time they applied, which was 2 years ago, 18 months ago, they got a perfect score of 10. Which was the first time that a university cancer center had ever gotten a perfect score. So I tell you that to say that we're obviously investing heavily at the James, but we're also investing in Nationwide Children's in Cincinnati because they're a part of that score. Because having that overarching sort of umbrella and pediatrics included is important. The other area that we're really collaborating is something called Orion, which stands for the Oncology Research Information Exchange Network. And what Dr. Caligiuri at the James and others realized a few years ago is that because cancer is so specific, right? So if everybody in this room had lung cancer, 20 years ago, we would have given everybody in this room the same treatment, and we would have been shocked that only a small percentage of people would survive. If everybody today in this room was diagnosed with lung cancer, there probably are 15 different types of lung cancer among us. and we need to treat each of them differently. The problem with that is to do the research on a subset of a type of cancer is very challenging. So the James, as an example, is the 3rd largest cancer hospital in North America. And even the James doesn't have enough patients from each of these types of cancer to do the research fast enough. So what Orion is a collaborative of 14 cancer hospitals across the country who've all agreed to upload all of their data into one shared database, so that every single patient opts in and they say, I'm willing to donate my blood and my tissue for the purposes of research under the one term, which is, if you find something that would be beneficial to me, you will come back to me and tell me about it. Because in research for a lot of decades, the patient never heard the results. And what that allows us to do is say, if somebody was diagnosed with, say, a rare appendiceal cancer, we could go to that database and say, wait a minute, I want to see if other people with that same genetic mutation, that same exact cancer, not in name, but at the genetic level, then we can see what worked for those patients. And maybe there's 50 of them who've been treated on it, as opposed to the James, which might have 2 or 3 or 4 patients. And so those are institutions across the country, and they're not just the institutions you would think of, but a lot of very diverse institutions, because the other thing historically in cancer research is most of the research has been done on white males. And that doesn't work in delivering care that's going to be successful for a diverse population. So Orion includes Morehouse, it includes the University of New Mexico, it includes the Huntsman Cancer Institute in Utah, because they have a huge genealogy program that's really valuable. So we are trying to collaborate more, and in the future we will definitely reach out beyond even those 14.
Yeah. When I had kidney cancer 4 years ago, and after the subsequent years, and after they took the kidney out, they did not ask me to volunteer, but they did this last year. They asked me to volunteer for that 14 collaboration.
Awesome. Well, and I'll tell you, one of the things we know with cancer survivorship, and congratulations on your survivorship, and the fact that Chris is riding in your honor. One of the things that we've seen over time is that people who've been touched by this disease want to give back. And that may be by participating in a research study that would improve the outcomes for others. And so at the James, the success rate for people sort of consenting to be a part of Orion is, I think it's at like 97% now, which is thousands and thousands of individuals every year.
The success of your fundraising is amplified through research, those other dollars that are brought in. How do you do on a net proceed percentage basis of funds raised versus expenses outlay?
Sure. So we are very fortunate. So all of our overhead, all of the expenses associated with Pelotonia are funded essentially by 6 organizations, by 4 companies and 2 families. And so 100% of every dollar raised goes directly to research, which frankly is it's a special thing, and it's not something that we take for granted. And so whether it's L Brands or Huntington or the Santulli family or AEP or Cardinal, I mean, we are nationwide. We are very, very, very fortunate. And so that investment every year is roughly $2.5 million that pays for everything. So that, last year $24 million went directly to research. And as somebody who's come from the nonprofit world, I will tell you that, as you all know, that's not the norm. I mean, we are so fortunate to be in this situation, and it allows us such transparency with our community. And one of the biggest motivators that people have reported to us in terms of why they get involved and why they financially support us is that 100% commitment. Yeah.
Just a follow-up. Our own foundation is 99, so I was hoping that we were beyond your 100.
Yeah. You're right there. You're beyond 99% of others, I can assure you. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to be here. Thank you so much.
This meeting's adjourned.